Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy, know y'all with me, let's get it, baby, Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy, know you with me, let's get it, baby. Boys just came back from their mission. We going crazy.
Welcome back to episode 3.0 of the Rockin' Royal Soccer Show. Episode 3 means I am the Anakin Skywalker of the program, Sean Walker, BYU beat writer from KSL.com, joined as always by, I guess, my Obi-Wan, my mentor, my guide, my Sherpa through this college soccer experience, Carla Swensen-Haslem. You know her from BYU TV and ESPN Plus, among other places.
Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here.
Thanks so much for joining me, Carla. I really do appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. I will say that.
Carla, I'm happy to be here too, because honestly, I expected this episode to maybe be a little bit down or more down for some BYU fans. They're in the middle of a 3-game road trip, just barely played at, what ranking were they before? Number 23, St. Louis, and then at Long Beach State, tough road trip, almost back-to-back nearly consecutive travel days going from St. Louis to the West Coast in Southern California. And yet BYU picks them off with a pair of 1-1 draws. Ali Fryer with the equalizer from Caroline Stringfeller in the opener at St. Louis on the trip. And then Addie Gardner gets her first goal of the season, third of her career, on an assist from, you guessed it, Ali Fryer, of course. Because if there's a goal at BYU right now, it's got to come through Ali Fryer in one way or another. That one finished 1-1 at Long Beach State. So all told, just big picture-wise, before we dive into the granular, the nitty-gritty of it all, Carla, how are you feeling about a pair of road draws against these two very good, very quality sides for Jen Rockwood's club?
I think it's actually pretty good. I went into this, I think, unsure of what to expect. I wouldn't say negative, Sean. Perhaps I'm the yin to your yang. Perhaps I bring more positivity to the expectations for the upcoming games. But that being said, I didn't know what to expect. And so I'm taking this as 2 positive wins. The team scored. That's always a plus. That was the biggest question for this BYU team, is scoring. So the fact that they got a goal both by Ali Fryer in the St. Louis game and then Addie Gardner against Long Beach, I'm like, this is good. This is good. And against Long Beach, they even got the first goal. So that was also promising for BYU to be able to get on the board first rather than having to climb the mountain of trying to equalize. And so, I feel okay about it. I feel pretty good. And if I'm the BYU coaching staff, I'm feeling okay about it. Obviously, you want the win. But that being said, considering that this is very much a building year, considering that there's still so many questions in the air, considering that lineups are still changing, we still saw 2 different lineups against the Pelicans and then against Long Beach. And so considering all of those circumstances, I think coming away with 2 draws on the road is actually really good. And these are really good teams. We talked about this. If you caught up in our last podcast from last week, I'd encourage you to listen to it. We talked about how this is probably the toughest 2 weeks of BYU's entire schedule because they're traveling so much, because it's back-to-back, and because they're playing multiple ranked teams so early on in the season. And so to be in the toughest 2 weeks of your season and be able to get 2 draws, I think is actually a positive thing. Again, against some very, very talented teams. And so I think there's a lot that can be grown from this.
No, I absolutely think it's a positive thing. I think it's a very positive thing to go on the road, to be able to figure things out and not get blown off the ball. They controlled both matches, I think, very well.
Yes.
There were certainly spurts against St. Louis where they were under it a little bit, particularly in that first half, going down 1-0. I think you can make some argument for that. But for the most part, I thought they controlled both games very well. They responded very well to that opening goal against the Pelicans, which I think was really good. And maybe most importantly, Carla, and normally this type of thing is brought up in the context of making some excuses for a drop result or an off result or even a loss or that kind of thing. I don't want this to go that far, but BYU did also play these 2 games without 2 significant players, 1 starter and then another player who's kind of been coming off the bench a little bit earlier as a pretty significant player. Both Aaron Bailey and Abby Cotter didn't make the trip. They were out with illness for both of these matches. So I think particularly EB right in there. She had that beautiful assist to Fryer against Wisconsin. I think that fans saw, and she was their number 2 or 3 scorer all last year. I think to be able to do that to be able to do what they did while being shorthanded, I think is particularly even more impressive for this BYU side, that you can see they're still finding their way and they're still learning a little bit as they go. We've talked a whole bunch about it, losing 11 seniors and a dozen or so role players and significant players, a lot of backups to transfers and graduation, and a few of them just kind of moving on with their lives and their career and whatnot. So this team is still learning and they're still growing and they're still figuring things out. But I think you can see game by game, they're putting a little bit more of those puzzle pieces together in a lot of ways. And just kind of figuring out what this club looks like beyond last season's pretty near historic year, that run to the College Cup and all of that stuff. I think you can see the wheels kind of turning in their heads and developing on the fly in some way, which if you're a BYU fan, is really exciting to be able to watch a very different brand and a very different style in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it is very different. It's hard because I still think it's too early to say. Usually by the time you get to this 3rd and 4th game, you kind of have an idea of the identity of the team. And it's still, I just think, too early. I really think it'll take all the way until that Utah State, Boise State game in the next couple of weeks to really have an idea of what this team is going to look like as they get into conference play. So yeah, I agree with you. I do think the pieces are coming together. They're coming together slowly. I think it's coming together. The St. Louis game and the Long Beach game actually reminded me a lot of the Wisconsin game, in that possession-wise and shot-wise and shots on goal, their opponents won in those categories. I think particularly in Long Beach State almost tripled the shots on goal that BYU had, right? So these are teams that are very much outmatching in the statistics category against BYU, but BYU's coming out with either wins against Wisconsin or coming out with ties. And so I think that's optimistic too, in that they can play really talented teams but still hold these talented teams. I think that shows that there are some of those puzzle pieces coming together. Now, obviously, you want to get more possession. You want to get way more shots on goal. I think BYU still needs to get more shots. Against Long Beach, they only had 5 shots. It's not great. Now, the 1 out of 5 is a great statistic, but that's not usually how BYU plays. And so their offense, I think, still is the missing piece. But it shows that it is a gritty team and that they will hold you. And so, if anything, BYU may be able to use that to their advantage, just pure grit, to see if that can help them hold on until they figure out some of these puzzle pieces and some of these remaining questions for this squad.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because maybe we'll touch on this and then we'll move a little bit to the future some as well, to another really busy week at UCLA on Wednesday, and then back home against Utah State, a very good Utah State team that we'll touch on here in a minute. But this, I think you're right, Carla. Like, this is developing into kind of a little bit of an identity of a very gritty team, a team that's not afraid to get stuck in and to defend really well. And I don't think that was something that a lot of people expected with this club, having to replace the entire back line in front of goalkeeper Lynette Hernandez. But I don't think, and maybe let's give them a little bit of shine here. This defensive group, the 4-woman back line, even the 6 in a lot of ways, I think has held up extremely well through the first 3 games of the season. It feels like a team that is gelling and coalescing, led by Avery Frischknecht, first time starting center back, her former Springville High teammate, I should say, not quite classmate, but teammate, Tara Warner back there, and Presley Freeman. We've talked about Presley Freeman a little bit on this show, but she continues to get better and better every game. The former Gatorade Georgia Girls Soccer Player of the Year out of the Atlanta area. Man, she's really good. She is really good and really only getting better. I think she's the type of player that BYU doesn't necessarily get a ton, especially from out of state, a non-Utah type player coming in like this and able to start and contribute right away. And I just think this defensive presence right now it's very different from what I expected to see. And yet in some ways it's not. It's also it's a very Jen Rockwood-like defensive performance through 3 games into the season with very clear established roles and players that are willing to fit into those clear and established roles, I think.
Yeah. I'm trying to make sense of it all because you're right. There are so many similarities and there are some differences. I think the similarities come in how the back line stacks. Maybe we're getting too much into the, soccer tactics of it all, but the movement of the center backs, I think, is very similar to that of past BYU teams, having those two. You had mentioned Avery Frischnecht, and then Rustend has also been playing in that center back position and Warner in that back position, and they've kind of been switching off throughout this season. Played very, very central and very, very tight, which I think is very much a BYU style of soccer. And then you have differences in that you have wing players that perhaps don't get as high, but they suck in centrally, and that means that teams aren't getting as many looks in behind. There's good and bad that comes to it, right? It means that BYU's offense isn't producing as much, but it does mean that other teams are now having to dribble through really tight spaces, which is what you want on a defensive end. And so I think it's very much a defense that's trying to find its identity, but because they're playing that gritty type of soccer and because they're playing really tight, they're not letting in a lot of goals, which again is a compliment to them considering that they're playing really talented teams.
Yeah, not nearly as big of a deal. And then obviously Lynette Hernandez in goal right behind them. That's got to give them a little bit of confidence as one of the only returning players, certainly I think the only returning defensive player from the squad from last year who played significant minutes a year ago. So that's got to give them some confidence and maybe a little bit of extra juice to kind of perform there in front of them. So big props, I think, to that defense. And of course, big props. We already touched on her, but we can't completely move away from an episode without focusing on Allie Fryer. She continues to be the engine to the sports car, or at the very least, the souped-up Honda Civic, we'll call it right now, under Coach Rockwood.
Yeah.
2 goals and an assist. She's been involved in every goal, directly involved in every goal BYU scored this year. I think Coach Rockwood knew, and she's been very open with us about it, right? Coach Rockwood knew that Allie Fryer was going to have to take a massive role leadership-wise, attacking-wise, offensive-wise on this team because of everything that was last. I think through 3 games into the 2023 season, that role has even been magnified a little bit more, where she really does hold the keys to the car. Like, she really is the engine that kind of revs up this offense and gets it going in a lot of ways. She's been absolutely massive to this club in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I agree. I've been very impressed with, how she's played this season and how she did over the summer as well in the trainings that they do and in preparation, for the summer. I know Coach Rockwood has said that she stayed over the summer and worked out every single day and practiced and prepped for the team, and you can see that it's paying off. So to echo your words, I agree. I think she's looking very good, very much in form. I do think her teammates see her as a leader out on the pitch, as they do look for her and do look for her guidance. So I agree with you. I think she's only getting better and better. The question will now be, can her teammates find her more? Because every time she gets it, something good happens, but she's not getting it as much, I think, as Coach Rockwood would like. But like I said, perhaps that comes with time. And personnel and getting to know, some of the new players that are going to be playing with her. But I agree. I think she's doing really well, and I think she's on track to really peak towards the end of the season, which is what you want from your forwards. You want them to be getting the ball the most and to be nailing things, as you get towards the very end. But I agree. I think she's just been playing very well, and her runs have been really smart too. Because there's a lot of very talented, goal scorers in Division I soccer, but they don't always make the wisest runs, and so they expend a lot of energy. You'll see on their heart rate monitors that they ran 12-plus miles. And Allie isn't one of those players that's running 12-plus miles, but the runs she makes are very, very smart. And it allows her to conserve energy, and it allows her that when she does get the ball, that she's in an advantageous position. So I agree with you. I think at this point, she's very much been BYU's, highest performing player, not only in the stats category, but just in opportunities and making opportunities happen.
Moving on to this week, obviously Saturday, BYU back home against Utah State, a very good Aggie team. They're 3-0 on the season. 3-0 before they're going to Salt Lake City. They're going to play the University of Utah midweek. So we obviously we can't read the future from our recording. We don't know the results of that one as well. But 8 o'clock, Southfield, ESPN Plus will have the broadcast as always. If anybody can't or doesn't have tickets or can't get tickets to the BYU football game that opens that night at 6 p.m., or if you want to try a little bit of a doubleheader, I mean, you may be able to squeeze both in some ways. Obviously, football kicks at 6 against Southern Illinois, and then BYU in that in-state rivalry game against Utah State at 8 o'clock. I think this is a game where we'll know a lot about BYU against a quality Aggie team. They're, like I mentioned, they're 3-0 on the season, receiving votes / squeezing into the coaches poll, into the United Soccer Coaches top 25 as well. It's a really good Utah State team. But before that, no looking ahead for the Cougs, because BYU will be at number 11 UCLA this Wednesday, 8 p.m. Mountain Time. Annenberg Stadium in Los Angeles is the pen. Big Ten Network is the broadcast. And no, I did not misread that. Yes, that is BYU and UCLA on the Big Ten Network. Obviously, the Cougars now in the Big 12. The Bruins, long-standing kind of semi-rivalry, I'll call it, with BYU on the soccer pitch, now leaving the comfy confines of the Pac-12 in favor of the cross-country flights to the Big Ten. So I think this is a game where maybe we'll learn a little bit about the Bruins in a lot of ways, maybe even more about UCLA than BYU, coming in their third straight road game, the final game of a 3-game road trip as well. But you've called a lot of these contests, Carla. You've played in a lot of these big games as a former BYU women's soccer player. What kind of juice is floating around the BYU locker room with UCLA on tap right now?
Yeah, and I think it kind of varies depending on personnel. I know BYU when I played with them, and I get kind of this same sense from Coach Rockwood and her staff now, is they see this game kind of like any other game, in that you need to prepare for it, but also not get too high. And I feel like that was the mentality whenever we were playing some of these big, well-known soccer teams, such as UCLA, such as Santa Clara, is you just try not to get too high and you prepare and you take it seriously. So I imagine that's kind of similar to the approach that they're taking for this game. BYU has had success against UCLA in the past, but they've also lost to them in the past. This is a UCLA team that I think there's still a lot of questions about too. And so it's impossible to say, but I imagine BYU is approaching this as a learning experience, and to be able to go into LA is always very difficult. It's hard to play at UCLA. And so I imagine the team right now, probably feeling a little tired after being on the road for the last week and playing 2 games, is probably just trying to stay as even keel as possible and still preparing as much as they can, but recognizing that they can't get too high and they can't get too low. And again, see if they can, pull off an upset here. I know ranking wise, it would not be considered an upset, but for those who understand the stories and the circumstances behind both programs, I think a win for BYU would be an upset win, just because this UCLA team is very talented this year. But I mean, why not go into it optimistically?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think if you're a BYU fan, you're going to take some optimism into some of the results of the past week and a half. They are still unbeaten, 1-0-2 on the year. They've been able to grind out a couple of road results against 2 very good teams in St. Louis and Long Beach State. UCLA is another step up, though. No disrespect to those teams, to the Billikens or to the Beach at all. No, I don't intend any disrespect whatsoever, but UCLA is a step up. They're a step up from most programs.
Well, they're just so athletic. That's something that UCLA just brings in year after year. Some years they're better than others, but athleticism-wise, they always get the top recruits. They always get top recruiting classes in general. And so, you always have very athletic girls who are very, very fast on the ball, who are very, very strong. And so, you can always count on that to be at a very athletic match. It's going to be a very fast game. UCLA's defense is always very solid. So again, regardless of how they're ranking each year and regardless of how many players they return, you can always count on top recruits coming into the program.
Yeah, 100%. One of those top recruits that they recruited several years ago, she'll be suiting up wearing BYU blue this week. That is Mackenzee Vance. She was a forward at UCLA. She's playing a little bit more of like a 10-ish role, 10 floating 8 kind of role for BYU, the UCLA graduate transfer out of Bluffton, South Carolina, to be able to go from one team to the next. Obviously, that's becoming common in the transfer portal era, including college soccer, Carla. But I'm sure Mac knew and certainly had an idea, probably even formally knew with contracts and that kind of thing, that this game was coming up, a chance to transfer to another school, to BYU, and still play her old school. But what kind of feelings do you think are going through a player like this as they prepare to face friends, former teammates, and the like on the opposing team for the first time? Like, that's got to be a little bit, maybe a little odd and a little nerve-wracking in some ways, right?
Yeah. No, I would imagine so. Obviously, I can't speak for Mackenzee Vance, and I look forward to hearing her thoughts in just a bit on this same thing. But I think I see it as like a fun thing. I never went through the transfer portal myself. I was recruited to BYU and then stayed at BYU, but I did play against a lot of teammates that I had played either in high school ball or club ball from across the state. And it was fun to be able to actually get back on the pitch and play. So I like to think that this will actually be a fun opportunity for her to see so many of her old teammates and so many of her friends and to really compete. Like, there is something fun about that. There's something fun about really competing and leaving it all out there and really working hard, even if you're playing against people you know. And so, again, I can't speak for her, but I would imagine that this will be an exciting and a positive thing, regardless of the outcome. And, ultimately players transfer for a variety of different reasons. And I don't know the exact reasons that Mac transferred. Perhaps those are very personal decisions. But I imagine that coming back to UCLA and seeing so many familiar faces, my hope is that it brings back so many good memories for her while allowing her to still make the new memories that she's having now at BYU.
Yeah, 100%. So looking forward, we're going to include a conversation with Mackenzee Vance on the end of this podcast segment, because I wanted to get out a little bit with that and some of her thoughts, just touching on her former team, her current team, transitioning into BYU. She started all 3 games of this season as well in a very pivotal role. I don't think she's quite reached her expectations for this year. That's probably fairly obvious in a lot of ways, but I think she's growing into this new role in a lot of ways. And I think you're right, Carla, like being in those familiar environments on campus at UCLA may just unlock a little bit more, kind of relax her a little bit more to get the best out of her for this game. So we're going to wrap up with that conversation with UCLA transfer, now BYU attacking midfielder Mackenzee Vance. As always, thank you to my co-host Carla Swensen-Haslem, the former BYU soccer star, now BYU TV and ESPN Plus analyst, among other things, day jobs, and maybe your most important title, Mom to Lucia. That's fair to say, right?
That is my favorite title. I'll say that for sure.
That's the best title, and I think your wonderful husband Daniel will also agree with that as well. So, Carla, thanks so much once again for joining me this week, and to Cougar fans and everything in between, thanks for joining us. Subscribe as always on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, wherever you get podcasts. Don't be afraid to leave a rating or review. It really does help grow the show. For the Rock and Royal Podcast Soccer Show, let's get out to BYU midfielder Mackenzee Vance.
Let's get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly pretty crazy. It was funny because when I was getting recruited, that's all Jen talked about was like, we're going to be playing UCLA. And I'm like, yes, like I'm ready for it. I would love to play against UCLA. They're a great team. And I think it's just going to give our team a chance to really step up and show everybody like what we can do as a team.
Coming off of, you guys are still technically unbeaten on the season, 1-0-2 on the year, and maybe just as importantly as results, I feel like this team has been building with each game. Can you feel kind of, whether when you're playing or just in training, whatever it is, can you feel kind of some of that build of game by game with a group that is, they're like you, they're almost all brand new, playing new roles, new positions, new players, new teams in a couple of cases. Can you kind of feel the game by game build of this program right now?
Yeah, I think like starting in practice, like every practice, we get a little bit better. And one of the things that we're talking about right now is, can we get 1% better each practice, each game, just keep improving individually and as a team. And I think, yeah, like I can see the difference. Like it's starting to come along. Like we still have a few more kinks and, little like the little inexperiences that we're trying to work out, but everybody's so committed to just being better and being better as a team, and we all want to win and we all want to succeed. So I think just having that team environment where everybody wants to succeed and do well and push each other to be better, I think that's also just causing us to get better each day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What's the morale of this team like? What's the vibe of this team like right now? Because you're 3 games into the season, a good start to the year, I think. Not a perfect start.
Yeah.
Some of your teammates might not even say it's a great start, but I think it's been a good start so
Mm-hmm.
far. And then maybe just as importantly, sandwich right here in the middle of a 3-game road trip to start the year. You're in St. Louis one night, then you're on the West Coast 2 nights later. Now you're going back to the West Coast after a day
Mm-hmm.
or two, back in Provo. What's just kind of the vibe of the club right now, of the team right now?
Yeah, so I think here at BYU we have such a high standard, right? Just especially coming off the last couple of years, BYU has been so successful, and so I think having that standard, it's like everybody on this team is trying to meet that standard, and everybody's trying to push each other to be better. And so the team environment is very competitive. It's in a positive way, like we're not out there trying to hurt each other, like we're actually trying to like push each other to be better and just really focus on the successes that we get, and then the areas that we may be struggling in, we're really trying to hone in and just try and be better in that area. But yeah, like everybody has such a positive mindset here, and we're all just wanting to do well, and just for all the BYU fans, prove them that we're here to compete at the highest level.
For sure. I think a lot of fans are going to love to hear that last part in particular,
Mm-hmm.
because you're right. There is a high standard. There is a lofty standard set by the program, set by your coach,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, Jen Rockwood, players that have gone before, that kind of thing. Were you able to feel pretty quickly the elevated standard of BYU soccer when you made the move through the transfer portal from UCLA to BYU? Did you feel that pretty quick?
Oh, 100%. Even just like meeting with compliance. Compliance was telling me like, like we have such a high standard here. Like this is what we expect of you guys. We want you guys to succeed, and we have all the tools to help you guys be successful. So now it's just like you got to go out there and you got to do it and you got to show it. So yeah, 100%.
Well, how kind of on that note then, how I know you're only a couple of months into it, I guess, but how's the
Yeah.
transfer been? How's BYU been? Has it been what you thought it would be?
Yeah, I mean, I've never obviously been in an experience like this where I'm transferring, going to a whole new team right before season starts. Like I really only had like roughly 2 months to like get myself acclimated and situated, not only with, the elevation and things like that, but also making those connections on and off the field with the girls. So I think in that aspect, it's been a little challenging just because it's such a short, incoming where I'm like, okay, crap, like I really got to figure out the tempo, how we play, how we defend, like all these little things that I'm trying to figure out, and just kind of like putting myself in there and trying to be a leader just because I do have a little bit of experience just from playing at UCLA. So just trying to incorporate little things like that. And so it has been a little bit challenging, but the girls here has made the transition so easy. The coaches have been amazing, just like the fans as well. Like I remember our first game on Southfield, like I just remember looking around, I'm like, holy crap, like like I'm not used to this kind of stuff. So it's a really exciting time and experience to be here at BYU for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure. That first Southfield experience, it hits different. You're not the first
Oh
person that's
yeah.
told me that. It definitely hits different a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, you'll be back there on Saturday against Utah State, but we're not going to look too far ahead to that, even though that is, I don't know if your teammates or coaches have touched on it. That is a pretty significant in-state showdown. You'll get a really nice experience there of what that in-state rivalry between the Cougars and the Aggies is like. But first, Wednesday night, 8 p.m., BYU at UCLA, your former team, Annenberg Stadium in Los Angeles, live on the Big Ten Network. And I'm not going to lie, Mac, it still feels weird for me to say UCLA soccer live on the Big Ten Network.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
it's still
It
a little
is.
bit weird, right? before I get you out of here, I'll get you out of here on this. What's just one key that you guys are looking at with a very good UCLA team going there?
Yeah, I think right now our biggest thing is like focusing on our press. I think, you know, a lot of teams when they play against UCLA, they're a little bit afraid to press them because they're not trying to get beat in behind, or, you know, UCLA just has so many crafty technical players. And I think something that we can bring to the table is our press. And I think we're going to go out and we're just going to press them hard and, you know, make them feel uncomfortable, put them under some pressure and see what they're able to do. Because at the end of the day, they also have a lot of new players on their team right now. They have some injuries that they're working through as well. So I think, you know, if we can catch them on that press, we could be really dangerous and come up with some opportunities. So I'm really excited. It's going to be a great game.
For sure.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
A lot of crafty technical players, highly recruited players. You were one of them as recently as last year. I like that last part. You're going to try to make them feel a little bit uncomfortable off the pitch. And then I'm sure there will be a little bit of comfort afterwards with some handshakes, some high fives, some hugs.
Yeah.
I'm sure, right?
100%. Yeah, I'm so excited to see those girls. It's been a while, so and I'm also just super excited to be back in LA. Like LA is such a cool place, so it'll be fun.
100%. Well, Mackenzee Vance, thanks so much for joining me, and good luck Wednesday night in Los Angeles, and then on the weekend back home. Welcome back home, I guess, after a 3-game road trip.
Thank you so much.
You could place your bet. Coach G up on our side, so we never pressed. Praying meetings every day, so we never stressed. Rockin' Royal, rockin' Navy. Know you with me. Let's get it, baby. Rockin' Royal.